Welcome to this week's episode of the Smoke-Filled Room. This is our first episode after Major League Baseball's trade deadline. So before we even start, we've got to commiserate a little baseball fans. Michael, I know your Cardinals basically just gave up on the season, which isn't surprising. Chris, our White Sox have been a horrible disappointment all year. It's been kind of painful. We're not going to let John talk about his Cubs, and Oliver's Tigers just don't matter. But I think the most important thing on screen here, the saddest news, which is the White Sox traded Chris's doppelganger, Jake Burger. We need a photo of Chris with just his mustache, and you can see them side by side. Chris, are you okay with your boy Burger going to Miami?
You know, for what we got in return for him, I think it's a pretty good trade. I'm sorry to see my boy go, but, you know, the Marlins are already having some success with him. He had a good game last night and helped my fantasy team out. So I think it was a good trade and something that needed to be done.
I mean, we have won some elections in Florida, so maybe we start up a Core Strategies Florida division, and you can follow your boy out there to Miami Beach. I can see you on Miami Beach.
I would never move to Florida, no matter how much you pay me, Collin.
Not
Are you sure I can't talk about the Cubs?
South side there are no hot dogs and Polish sausage down there.
People aren't meant to live in Florida. I don't want my house to be underwater for 2 months out of the year.
All right, let's get serious. Political team. Let's do alphabetical order this time. Let's see if I can handle that. Abby, Chris, John, Matt, and Michael are our political team. Thanks, guys, for joining us. We're going to jump right into our topics because we have, as usual, a lot. And this is supposedly the slow time of Illinois politics. Let's start with House District 104. In the last week, the Republican representative for House District 104, Mike Marron, has announced that he's retiring. That puts that district potentially in play. Marron's a very well-liked local representative, had done a great job building up a lot of relationships. Really, that seat was never gettable by Democrats while Marron held it. But now that Marron has made it an open seat, it very well could be in play. What are people's thoughts on House District 104 and Mike Marron?
He's done a good job, popular state rep. You know, it's kind of sad to see him go, and it's going to be interesting to see who all gets in the race. I mean, we haven't really heard very many names. Obviously, it's kind of a fresh development. And there's a lot of people who were just not in contention because of where they live. So we're just going to have to see how it plays out. But like you said, there may be a path here for the Dems. So it's going to be a full court press from both directions. I think it's going to have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a Pritzker barely winning this district. I think Biden also barely won it. This is certainly a very competitive district, and the Dems are going to be playing for this. And we're going to talk about all the places the Dems are going to be playing in a bit. But this all goes to show that this is going to be a cycle that House Republicans can't take for granted, in the House or the Senate for that matter, because you know, the Democrats are going to see how much they can get that majority. So they're going to fight for every district, and this is going to be this is going to be a close call.
Yeah, I think I saw that Biden won this by 1 point in 2020. So there's definitely a path here, and it includes a lot more of.
Could be wrong, but I'm saying that Trump actually pulled it off by a few points. But I'm looking at some old data. But either way, what I can tell you is the baseline. What we're seeing when you look at Core has created our baseline for districts on our anticipated performance, notwithstanding Trump factors and other factors. And this is an R4 district in our math. So Marron won it by 8. It's more like an R4 if you don't have someone as popular as a Mike Marron running in it. So, I mean, it's a Republican district, but it's swingy enough that the Dems can play in it, especially with the kind of money they have.
Yeah, actually, the district itself actually was a Biden plus 3.8 is the exact results of the district.
Is that what it was? Yeah, you know what? I'm reading this backwards. I saw the negative sign and I got it backwards. So yeah, you're right. Biden 3.8. And then actually we won it for Pritzker. Bailey won it by 0.16. So it was basically a tie for the governor's race. I mean, I like looking at the progressive tax results, and in that district, progressive tax campaign went down by almost 17 points. So I mean, it's definitely not a blue district.
I think it's really going to come down to on who the Republicans and Democrats nominate. You know, if Republicans nominate a more, farther right candidate and the Democrats end up nominating a more centrist candidate, that could really make it a race. But I think as long as you have someone who's kind of in that Mike Marron vein of style Republican, we should be able to hold on to this seat. But then again, it really goes something we're going to talk about later of Democrats are going to recruit a candidate in every district. And if they're willing to spend money, who knows what could happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a thing we're going to have to look at. And as you said, we'll talk about that. I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at the data, and we tracked data on which district saw a red wave in 2022 with Bailey on the ballot, with all the factors that were facing Republicans, because there were some areas where Bailey did very well. And this was one of those areas that Bailey actually did okay in. So obviously I always want to see a candidate recruited that matches the district, and certainly a candidate that's on the far edge of the district might cause us problems. But I'm not seeing this as one where, we have to nominate. I mean, you hear this a lot from the more moderate wing of the party. We have to nominate a moderate in every district. That's just not true. And this one isn't one where we need a moderate. Marron was a conservative. So I think the narrative here that we need to nominate somebody, even to Marron's left is not true. A solid conservative like Marron is going to do very well in that district.
Well, I think a lot of times it's not necessarily even like policy positions. It's more about, how you're presenting yourself to the voters. Like that makes a big difference. Whereas, you may have two candidates that have similar policy positions, but one is perceived as more, kind of middle of the road just based on how he presents himself. So that's a factor for sure.
Yeah, it's true. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on it, and we'll keep our watchers and listeners informed. Next, let's talk about briefly Senate District 53. We talked about it last week, and at the time when we recorded, Patrick Fingston, who was recording with us, mentioned that he knew that district very well, and that Tipsword, the representative for one of the two reps in that district, would be the front runner for the district. Well, he's got since then gotten word that Tipsword will not be actually seeking that appointment or seeking that district. So it looks like it's going to be a wide open run for Senate District 53. I don't know how closely any of you guys follow that district, but it's going to be an open district. Republican primary will be the whole race. Dems won't be able to play in that district. But curious if anybody's hearing anything about SD 53.
I think one of the unique things there is both of the state representatives in that district are freshmen. So, they've both expressed that they're not planning on or interested in running for this seat at the time. So it's going to be, we'll have to just keep an eye on it and see who comes out of the woodwork as a potential candidate. But like you said, it's kind of it'll be done on March 19th, right? It's just the end of it.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see. The people that everyone thought would run for it, either the two reps, as you said, Michael, are freshmen, and they're happy where they are. So it's going to be a newer face. There's some local elected officials there that are pretty popular. A few who are friends of ours, friends of mine. So I'm interested to see who goes for it. But right now, we haven't heard too many names.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of different candidates from all across that district. It's pretty geographically vast. Like Michael said, Rep Bunting also isn't going to get in the race. I would expect a candidate from Grundy County to get in, a candidate from McLean County to get in, and a candidate from the more, eastern portion of the district. So it's really going to depend on who can turn out their geographical base and build coalitions in parts where they're not geographically from.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on it. Let's keep moving. We got a lot to get through, and I know there's a few topics later on that I know some of you are itching to talk about. Chris, we talked a little bit about this, but you haven't had time to really expand on your thoughts. So let's talk about Senate District 5. Patricia Van Pelt, after basically not showing up for the entire spring session, yet collecting a paycheck, of course, because she's an Illinois Democrat, and that's what they do, and nobody ever calls them out for it. She is finally actually retired, and so it's setting up a very interesting appointment process between it seems like the front runners here are the two reps that make up that district, and it's looking like it's a little bit of a progressive versus establishment Dem fight. Chris, what are you hearing there?
Yeah, so kind of a transition from talking about the 53rd, where neither of the incumbent state representatives in a district are going to go run for a opening. Both of the incumbent state representatives in the 5th Senate district will be vying for this appointment. The two state representatives are Omar Williams and Lakeisha Collins. Omar Williams is more of a establishment type, moderate type, mainstream Democrat type, whereas Lakeisha Collins is more aligned with the progressives. Now, the interesting thing about this district is that most of the votes come down to more mainstream Democratic committeemen. You talk about people like Walter Burnett Jr., who happens to be Omar Williams' stepfather of all things. He controls the most vote in this appointment process. He has 24.7% of the vote. Alderman Irvin from the 28th Ward, he has 16.1%. So these are all more establishment times. Alderman Irvin's wife is the current city treasurer, and she's running for Congress now. So more establishment types. There are some progressive wards in this district that will get some say in the appointment process. La Spada in the 1st and Sigcho Lopez in the 25th both have a small percentage of the vote, but nothing nearly to where they might be able to have a significant say. In my opinion, I would presume Omar Williams is going to get this just because of the makeup of this ward.
Right.
But
Chris, let me just jump in and get, because I want to get to the topic. So you've laid the groundwork, but the topic at hand, as we watch these districts, because my big thing is I'm always looking for how far left is the progressive wing of the Democratic Party going to drag that party in a moderate state. And even though you laid the groundwork well, the progressives do not have much of the weighted vote in this process, but that's not going to stop them from making a heck of a lot of noise.
Oh, no, and they have already have in similar appointment process. We recall from the Christina Zayas appointment just a month ago or so that was a complete, disaster. They're all jammed into a gymnasium with no air conditioning, and the progressives are up in arms. This is a little bit different of a district, though. We're dealing with the west side of the city, heavily African-American, very poor, more establishment type Democrats, mainstream types that you would see. But you're right. Progressives are going to get involved in this because they have some committeemen involved in this process. So I wouldn't be surprised if A, the appointment goes the establishment's way, and B, progressives get up in arms with this and end up primarying Williams if in fact he gets appointed to the seat.
Yeah, it's definitely something worth watching. As I mentioned, I mean, it's we get a lot of press in the Republican Party for how our base or sort of the furthest reaches, if you will, of our base tends to sort of pull us from the center, but the Democrats, it's the same exact deal. And so I always like to keep that focus on that side, because the more it happens, this is a moderate state, and the more that happens, it's going to create opportunities. We talked about it last week. Republicans will have opportunities as the Democratic Party keeps capitulating to their base.
Well, I believe Republicans will only have opportunities as long as they can take advantage of those opportunities. Unfortunately, it seems like the current brass of the Republican Party is more focused on kind of the short-term plays, like the one district maybe we can pick up in the Senate, as opposed to taking advantage of some of these far-left progressives and maybe moving forward for the future. I haven't seen that yet, and I hope more people in the Republican Party start taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, if people are wondering why we're talking about this district as a foregone conclusion for Democrats, it's because our baseline puts it as a D61. That is not so there's a reason why we're saying this race is just the Democrats. But to Chris's point, if we had the resources and maybe the gumption, it's the kind of district where we come in and create a PAC and throw some dollars behind the more progressive candidate and create chaos on the Democratic side. If Pritzker and the Republicans can do it to us, why can't we do it to the Democrats?
Yeah, but Collin, that's the enemy of good government right there. I've never been in favor of such things like this.
Yeah,
because,
listen,
again,
that's not my job. Governing is my job. Politics is my job, man.
all you're doing is creating a more progressive Illinois by doing this until the Republican Party,
which drags their party further left and creates opportunities because the voters see them raising there.
You're only taking one step there, Collin. You're not going beyond that. All you're saying is like, look at these crazies. But as we've seen previously, most voters don't really seem to care that much about the crazies, especially in these deep blue districts. So all you're doing is adding a more progressive vote down in Springfield. And yeah, it might cause some problems, but it's nothing that you'd ever see in the press. It just drags our state further down. If the Republican Party wants to be serious, let's make a long-term play and not waste money playing in, making the progressive.
I think that is the long-term play. But anyways, it's an interesting debate, and we'll certainly revisit it. Oliver, it sounded like you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I understand your point, Chris, but at some point, like, the Democrats are playing 3D chess and we're continuing to play checkers. It's like, and we don't take risks, as we talk about very often. That's where we end up losing things. So why don't we start taking some risks? I'm not suggesting Collin's thing is maybe the right thing, but why aren't we taking risks when there's no other reason not to? Like, maybe throw something on 6, Chris, Like, why not? We have nothing to lose in that district.
Maybe Collin's thing is the right thing. Come on, Collin's thing is always the right thing.
Taking risks.
I'm not gonna get in between you two. I'm just
Taking risks means looking at a district that perhaps is D+10 on a rating and saying, what can we do to play in this district so that we can maybe not win now, but win in 2 years, win in 4 years. That's taking a risk. Or even a district at D+20, maybe you take advantage of a minority population that you can bring onto the Republican Party side. Taking risks is not getting involved in a D+61 district, funneling money to crazy people to make the opposition party look bad. The Republican Party cannot afford to do that when they are in super minorities in both.
But your point is it's one step out of 20, and I get that. I'm not going to spend time here talking about the other 19 steps. I'm just saying it's something worth considering. But because we got a lot to cover, Chris, you've made your point. It's a valid one. I appreciate it. Let's go to the next topic because we got to keep moving here. We got a lot to cover. So it's been talked about a lot in Republican circles privately for the last week. Democrats last week had a caucus meeting, which I have to give credit where it was due. The first person to report on this was Cat Fax and Rich Miller. A lot of people have been talking about it since, which has been, my dog really wants to come outside, which has been that Democrats are, the House Democrats have decided they're going to recruit candidates in every Republican district around the state. They think they might have opportunities to pick up seats if it becomes a really bad year for Republicans. And so they want to put a Democrat butt in every single seat. What's up, Dustin? So while I pet my dog, why don't you guys give some thoughts on this? What's up, buddy?
Yeah, I think it's a really, a bold idea from them. I don't think they're going to recruit a Democrat in every seat, but I definitely think they're going to recruit, in a lot of these seats that are held by suburban Republicans, in Northern Illinois. And I think it's going to make Republicans work depending on who the nominee is. I mean, for example, House District 70, which is currently held by a Republican, is a Trump +3 district. And, if Democrats come in and find a moderate Dem candidate to run in that district, Representative Kiker could have a race on his hands just with the makeup of that district and who's at the top of the ticket. I don't think it's really going to impact members of the General Assembly who are in districts that Biden won. Patrick Finkston's covered this at length. And I just think that's going to put House Republicans in a really vulnerable position because now you're going to be forced to, spend your resources defending incumbents who are going to have well-funded challengers rather than looking at the map and saying, where can we start to pick up different seats? So it's really going to shift the dynamic of 2024 if House Dems are able to pull that off.
I mean, if you're the Democrats, why not? Like, you have to feel like you're playing with house money at this point. Like they've picked up so many seats, I think, that they never expected. So why not try? We've done such a poor job of campaigning as Republicans. Why not see if they can pick up more ground and seats they didn't think they could?
Well, it goes back to what we talked to, what we've been talking about for months, is that once you win, you can't just give up ground. You got to keep pushing forward. And the Democrats do such a good job at this. They're not conceding any ground. They're acting like they're still 10 points behind, even though they have a supermajority in pretty much everything. And I think that this is a part of a bigger strategy to build their bench and make these districts that are red districts in play in 2 years and 4 years and 6 years down the line. And it just shows me the fact that they're doing this and saying they're going to do it. It just shows that they are thinking so much more long-term and 10,000 foot view. They're trying to play chess when we're playing checkers. So I think it's a good play on their part, but it will take a lot of resources, but they have the resources to spend. So why not?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'll say this. I want them to come play in a district like Kiker's district. I mean, I'm looking at that in our baseline. That's an R14. And if they send somebody in that district, then Jeff's going to work harder. He's going to raise more money. It's going to give him a reason and his donors and his volunteers a reason to engage. This is a two-edged sword. I mean, we've debated this for years because there's a big debate in Cook County. Every year there's a big debate in Cook County. Do we recruit for these really blue districts or do we not? There's a philosophical debate in politics about, do you run a candidate in districts that you can't win in? And we can get into that if you guys want. But, I look at it as if Kiker gets an opponent, it makes him work harder, makes him raise money. I think it strengthens our party. And sure, it does help the Dems too. I mean, it helps them build up a bench, helps them identify a candidate. And maybe, just maybe, if it's a bad Republican year, they pick up a seat here or there. But I don't think it's not without benefits for our side of the aisle too.
I would say definitely, in some of these Southern Illinois districts, if they're able
Chris
to.
keeps trying to get in. Go ahead, Michael. Everyone keep talking. Don't let Chris get in.
I would just say, some of these Southern Illinois districts, they can try to recruit a candidate, but obviously they're going to, get maybe 15 or 20% of the vote. And like you said, it could serve as a motivator for a lot of these incumbent Republicans, which I think will end up, benefiting us a lot more than it's going to ever benefit them.
Chris, go ahead.
So what we're talking about right now is we're talking about incumbent Republicans. We're talking about, oh, this is great. It's going to make incumbent Republicans work harder, and maybe we'll hold on to these seats, or maybe the Republican Party will only lose one of them. That is the silliest thing I've ever heard here, because how bad have things gotten for Illinois GOP where that's what our win condition is, that we don't lose any seats this cycle, where the Democrats are going to make us work harder because they're actually running against somebody who might be vulnerable. I mean, I think that's just silly. I mean, look, the Democrats are going to run somebody everywhere. They got the money to do it. Republicans have no money. And frankly, this is why I mentioned it. I think Patrick might have mentioned it last week, or maybe I did. The Dems are just going to pick up seats next year. They're going to pick up like 2 or 3 seats, and the super majorities is going to get bigger at this point, because we talk about what's going to make us work harder. I mean, maybe it does, but I still don't think. I think this is a bad thing for the Republican Party, frankly.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's overall a good thing. I'm just saying that, listen, we've talked a lot about how our party needs to grow and strengthen, and even our incumbents need to work harder, and we got to build from somewhere. So I'm finding the silver lining in the situation. It's saying that maybe this is the thing that wakes up our party and gets us out there, gets us raising money more, gets us being more active more. Because a district, let's be honest, let's look at Mike Marron's district. I mean, no one was looking at Marron's district. No one was saying we got to worry about that district. And now suddenly we're all talking about what we thought was a safe district in House District 104. I mean, if we had an infrastructure that was out there working, regardless of whether we were safe or not, then HD 104 wouldn't be in place. So your point, Chris, is valid that, yeah, we got a lot of work to do as a party. My hope is that this might get us doing the work that we need to do, so that the next time this comes around, we can just laugh it off and say, yeah, we're fine. Let's keep staying on the offense.
Yeah, Collin, I think you make a really good point. There's definitely going to be members out there, like Jeff Kiker, who you're going to give them an opponent and they're going to raise a lot of money. They're going to continue to be more active in the community. My worry is with some of these members who are in competitive seats and they're not putting in the work to raising money. I mean, we talked last week about how Kevin Schmidt has raised $0 last quarter. And like, those are the type of members where if you're going to get an opponent, like, you need to be working to raise money now, be in your community, calling your donor list. Like, the Democrats put the playbook out there. So now I think we as a party have plenty of time to, kind of build our response and put the necessary infrastructure in place between now and next fall to make sure that we can hold on to these seats. So we can spend.
Listen, part of the reason why they're doing this is because of districts like 114. You just mentioned Schmidt. I mean, Schmidt's going to have a tough reelect on his hands. He overperformed significantly. That's actually a D+3 district. D+, it's really 2.5. So pick which way you want to round that. But that's a district that actually isn't an easy one for Republicans to win. And I'd imagine part of the strategy here for Democrats is trying to spread us so thin that we can't defend the seats that we need to defend, like Schmidt in his district in 114. So what we can't do is let this distract us from those districts that we really need to be playing in, which is why someone like a Kiker and others, they need to stand on their own 2 feet. And McLaughlin, they need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and get out there and raise money and run their own races, because we can't, as a party, we can't expend resources on those districts when we got more higher priority districts to play in. All right, let's go to the other side of this topic, because we've had this on our list to cover for like 4 weeks now. The Illinois Policy Institute has gotten some shade lately for their bad win record in campaigns. And so we've had this on the docket to talk about. And since we're talking about the Dems recruiting in every district, it's time for us to talk about the right of center efforts to recruit in every district. So the Illinois Policy Institute, for the last 1 to 2 cycles, has made it a point to go out and try to recruit candidates in districts that are not in play for conservatives, for Republicans, in an effort they believe it's beneficial to get a Republican in every district. And we can have a philosophical debate about whether that's right or whether that's wrong, but that's been their strategy under Dan Patlak and a few others. They've done a lot of work to help these candidates that no other entity is able to help. The state party on the Republican side, the caucuses, can't help these candidates because they've got higher priority districts to worry about. And so IPI has gone out and they've helped these candidates with petitions, and they do it through, I think, their C4 or their PAC. I don't know how they do it because they're a C3. So there's legality to talk about, I'm sure. But the effort is to help these candidates, and they train them. They help them with ballot access. They give them advice. They do a lot of thankless work for candidates that have almost a 0% chance of winning.
Mhm.
And of course, those groups out there that hate IPI have used it as an excuse to say that, hey, IPI loses every race that they touch. Sure, that's true, but they came into it knowing that they were going to lose every single one of these races. So let's talk about the other side of this, which is that IPI is trying to recruit candidates in these in every Democrat district to make sure that every Democrat has an opponent. So there are efforts on both sides here. Anybody have any thoughts on the Republican or conservative side of this coin?
Look, I think it's an admirable thing that IPI is doing. As somebody who's lived in many deep blue districts in my time, Bob Rita, Bobby Rush, and Justin Slaughter now at the state
Are
house.
you one of those people not letting Bob Rita show up at community events? How dare you?
I am not one of those people. Bob
You'll be
Rita is
next when he
still,
goes to sue the next person.
Bob Rita is still welcome in the municipality I live in, for better or for worse. Anywho, I think it's an admirable thing they're doing because, you know, nobody likes to go to the ballot box and have no choice on a ballot. I get that. On the other end, listen, you know, some people just run for these races anyway, and they're giving those candidates a little bit of money, a little bit of resources to make them run a halfway decent campaign. I think that's great. On the flip side of things, I also think I am fundamentally opposed to the idea of running people everywhere because if the other side uses it effectively, they utilize a challenger to drive up turnouts. And this is Democrats should be doing. Whether or not they've been doing it recently is another thing up for guard, but it allows your opponent to spend resources against you and drive up turnout and bring out people who wouldn't otherwise have voted.
So
and
Chris,
because of
but my question to you is, does that matter in an election year when there are no statewide races on the ballot? Does it matter if we drive up turnout in deep blue districts when there's no statewide races at play? Because we're not in play for the presidential race. So does it matter?
No, there might not be statewide races, but there perhaps could be countywide races. There perhaps could be other districts that overlap with that district. Like take, for example, there's the 19th Senate District. The 19th Senate District has Tim Ozinga, which is a pretty deep red district on one hand, and it's got Debbie Myers-Martin on the other hand, which is a pretty deep blue district. If Republicans run a candidate in Debbie Myers-Martin district, it makes her go out there and maybe drive up turnout in Matson or Country Club Hills or something, and it can negatively affect the other side of that Senate district. So that's what I'm saying here. I mean, I understand a statewide thing, but there's more things that incorporates a state house district than just statewide.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
There's definitely a risk to it, but I also think that there's also a risk to not having not recruiting a candidate that at least is somewhat legitimate, because if we don't have a candidate, then, you know, Art Jones or some radical or racist or Nazi, etc., could run.
Some crazy candidate like Matt DeRay will put their name on the ballot.
They didn't ask me to run, thank God. So
yeah, but Michael, you're right. I mean, we've been burned by this, by not recruiting candidates in districts and then getting stuck with horrible candidates. And then what do you do?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have had philosophical debates on this topic, and I would love to get into one, but we're halfway through the episode and we are a 10th through our itinerary or our agenda. So let's go to the next one. Michael, I know you're itching to talk about IL-12. You weren't able to join us last week because driving 5 hours to join us in person probably wasn't an ideal scenario for the SFR. So why don't you update us on what's happening in IL-12 in the race with Mike Bost and Darren Bailey?
Mike Bost is making the rounds in the district. They're out of session now. He's rolling out a lot of endorsements, over 100 local elected officials, everything from, you know, mayors to county board members, countywide office holders. And then a couple of days ago, he rolled out a list of 22 Republican Party leaders, you know, county chairman and state central and folks like that from throughout the district that have endorsed him. So he just keeps rolling out, you know, endorsement after endorsement and putting up a strong showing on that front. On the other hand, we've got Darren Bailey, you know, keeping a very close eye on President Trump's schedule and trying to get to as many events as possible, because it seems like he thinks that is his path to victory. But obviously we've heard rumors that that is not even a possibility, that Trump isn't even considering endorsing Darren. So obviously we're keeping an eye on that. You know, Trump's changed his mind before, so we'll see if he does again.
Mike, I want to ask you about this. Well, in post, Lane will bring this up for us in post on the screen. Both after the DOJ indictment of Trump in the last week, both Bost and Bailey came out strong in support of Trump. We'll bring up both of those social media posts. I'm just curious on your thoughts. I mean, obviously they both have to keep Trump happy, so both of them have to come out and say nice things about Trump in this process. What are you hearing locally about that whole situation?
I mean, I'm hearing from a lot of people, voters and just across the board, that they're aggravated that, they just keep going after Trump like this. I mean, Trump's polling very well in this district, so he's got a lot of support here, and that's probably the appropriate play.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it is interesting, the different races they're running. Bost is doing a great job consolidating local support. And Trump is, Freudian slip. Bailey is campaigning to his one best chance. So they're both playing their strategies.
I would say one thing that's kind of unique that I've heard over the course of the last week or so is that there are some individuals that were county coordinators for Darren during his governor's race that have expressed, aggravation and disappointment that he's running against Mike, because they've been, Mike supporters, and they were also supporting Darren for governor. But now that we've got this binary choice between the two, they are, still 100% behind Mike and not going to support Darren. And I think that's probably been a surprise to some of those guys.
Interesting. Appreciate the update. Anyone else have thoughts on aisle 12?
I just think Mike Bost is slowly but surely putting this race away. I think the really interesting thing is going to be, what does Darren's Q3 fundraising look like? I think if Darren has a weak Q3 fundraising and Mike puts up another strong quarter, he continues to consolidate local support. I mean, this race could be over pretty quickly, unless Trump comes in at the last minute.
That's the key, right? I mean, we talked about it after our poll. Like, the delta here is 8 to 10 points. Mike's got to get into the double digits in a lead to be safe, regardless of what Trump does. And he's not there yet. So that's what they're shooting for right now. That's their entire goal, is to get their lead to double digits. Otherwise, they're going to have to sweat all the way through March.
But I think just, Bailey has to do something, to really start setting himself apart from Mike and just do something to show momentum, because on the ground right now, it's just Darren has all the momentum going for him. I think Bailey's just got to, or Mike has all the momentum going for him, misspoke. Bailey just has to do something to give his campaign some positive air.
John, that's actually something that's got me a little bit scared. We haven't talked about it yet, because we're not talking about this happening until February. But if Trump does not come in and Bost continues in the path that he is, then by February, Bost is going to be up by double digits. And that's going to create desperation mode by the Bailey people, which the last time we saw that group of people in desperation mode, you saw it with Jeannie Ives' campaign, where they put out that crazy TV ad to get attention. I mean, it's known in politics that if you're down significantly in the lead up to an election, you have to do something that gets you attention. And they've shown that they know how to do that. The problem is, if Bailey comes out with some sort of an ad or something that's super controversial to get himself attention, it's every Republican across the state who will have to answer for that. And so that's one of my biggest fears of this whole thing, is that this primary stops being a battle just in aisle 12, but becomes something that every Republican in the whole state has to talk about, because Bailey does something highly controversial to get himself noticed to try to win his race that hurts all Republicans in the state. That's not a problem until January or February of next year, but it's a serious problem that I know I'm concerned about. I just haven't voiced it yet. It's something that I'm a little bit nervous about.
Collin, you've been reading my mind. Go ahead,
it's a scary
Chris.
place to be in the mind of a
I know.
I
I guess we'll let Chris talk now, maybe.
Sorry. The goofy thing I'm kind
Chris,
of
come closer to your mic, buddy.
Oh, sorry. The goofy thing I'm worried about is, Collin was talking about playing in unwinnable Dem districts, but I'm going to talk about the Dems doing this. I wouldn't be surprised if the funny money comes in and maybe launches one of those famous Darren Bailey is an extremist ads on TV. Maybe gives them a little bit more to boost. Now, I don't know what the media market looks like down there. Maybe it's a little bit different and that might not be viable, but maybe it's a mailer. Maybe a sinister PAC shows up. I don't know. But, I think the Dems have, well, going back to what I said earlier, the Dems have the leeway to do that. Ours don't. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Dems might come in.
Well, they've shown they're willing to do it in the past. It's a play they've done before, and they've got unlimited money. So why not? I mean, we talked about it before Darren announced in our very early episodes of Smoke Filled Room. We talked about how some of this, we have proof, was driven by the Democrats, not just Republicans. Some of the noise here on this race was driven by Democrats because they're gleefully looking at this saying we can weaken Republicans, maybe even take out Mike Bost with somebody like a Darren Bailey. I mean, they come out ahead if Bailey wins this race, and they know that. So you're not wrong, Chris. That very well may be in the works.
I probably
Michael's
just gave somebody an idea.
You didn't give them the idea. They had that idea already. But Michael will keep a close eye on this for us. Let's jump to IL6 because I know, Oliver, you've been hearing some developments about IL6. Some of the candidates who ran in the primary unsuccessfully 2 years ago on the Republican side are now making noise about running this time around. So, and you also have clarification on whether or not Jeannie Ives is looking, because I know you and her this week. So what's the latest on IL6?
Yeah, so the more things change, the more they stay the same in IL6. So just a quick clarification, Jeannie Ives is not running it in IL6, but a lot of other former IL6 candidates are kicking the tires on this race. So I'll go in order of what I'm certain of and what are more just rumors. So Nikki Conforti, she ran last cycle in the primary. She finished in third, I believe. She got a decent following in DuPage, but really didn't latch on anywhere else, but looks like she's kicking the tires again. I've also heard rumors of Gary Grasso. He actually finished just behind Keith Pika on that primary. So my guess is he would be the strongest candidate if he did come into the race. And then Jay Kinsler.
Strongest is a relative term. Let's make sure we clarify that.
Yeah, yes. It's like I said, when we're looking at people that have run for this office again, none of them performed particularly well in any of these races. And then Jay Kinsler. So he ran against Jeannie Ives when the 6th congressional district was before it was redistricted, and he lost 70-30 to Jeannie. So I'm not quite certain about that, but he's become a lot more active on social media, and I keep hearing his name pop up here and there. So will be interesting to see how that all sorts out.
Aren't there rumors that Scott Caspar is looking at it as well?
I haven't heard that, but Chris may know more about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if
I know his big goal is to run for mayor against Keith Pecan in Orland Park, but I have heard rumors that Caspar is also looking at the congressional district as well.
It wouldn't surprise me, judging from how much Illinois Review just talks about Keith and Pecan and the 6th congressional district and all that stuff.
I mean, they really should just rename it. It's not, I mean, it's rest in peace to the old Illinois Review that was actually a useful tool. Like right now, it's just the Keith Pecan bashing blog. I mean, they should just name it that and be done with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, once again, we're getting a pretty interesting, pretty, boring field of candidates in IL6. I'd agree with Oliver. If Grasso gets in, it's basically his primary to lose. And we'll see if he does any better in the general election, because we're going from midterm to presidential, and DuPage is going to have an aneurysm with Trump on the ballot. But Grasso's from there. Maybe it won't matter as much.
Well, let's show that we can be balanced here. I mean, the reason why Pecan did not pull that off was the DuPage County side of the district. He did very, very well in Cook County, even in Chicago. It was DuPage that killed him. And you're right, Grasso is well known in DuPage. So if you're looking for a good candidate in IL6, you're probably hoping for a DuPage candidate. Grasso's got a footprint there. So it's pretty well documented that Gary Grasso is not a fan of ours. I'm not a fan of Gary's, but we've proven that we can be very objective in these smoke-filled room discussions. And, Gary does bring a different dynamic to it. I don't think he's as strong of a candidate just on paper as Keith was with the background Keith had. So I don't know that he'd do as well, but he does have the one advantage of coming from the DuPage County side.
And just to wrap this up. So what I've heard basically is that people will say, well, Nikki's all right. Gary's all right. We know them. Maybe they're not the strongest candidates, but are we really going to win this district? And we have such big egos here in DuPage that we're not going to support someone who's not one of our people. So I think there's just sort of this resignation, unfortunately, that this is just how it's going to be this cycle, which is, hopefully not how it all shakes out. But that's kind of things where things are at right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, listen, everyone's assuming that Trump's going to win the primary. And we talked about it last week. When we do projections, there's an 8 to 10 point delta of how Republicans will do in these suburban districts based on whether it's Trump at the top of the ticket or not. If Trump's not at the top of the ticket, I'm looking at our numbers for IL6. I mean, it'll play. I mean, Caston will do better than this, but on paper, all things being equal, it could play closer to a D1. Now, Caston makes it harder to win. I get
Yeah.
that. I'm not saying it's actually a D1, but I'm just saying that's a district we could win if Trump's not the top of the ticket. We won't know that until next year, and that's well past
Yeah.
the filing deadline. So the hope is that a decent candidate puts their name out there just in case this district becomes in play. I've always liked Nikki Conforti. She's just a super, super nice lady who's never really been
I
able to
agree.
pull together a strong campaign. You see her on paper. She seems like she could be great. It
Yeah.
just doesn't really tend to translate into electoral success. But I think I hate that IL6 is becoming an afterthought, because if Trump's not our nominee, which I know is a giant if, but if he's not our nominee, the 6th is in play.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I agree.
I was like, I think this goes to kind of like a larger, problem that we're seeing in the Republican Party in Illinois a little bit, is like, you really focus on our actual core strategies and like the importance of candidate recruitment. And I think this is a great example of why it's really important. Like we need to take the time to recruit quality candidates, because kind of what we've been doing right now in these like 3 suburban congressional districts that are in play, it's just rehashing old candidates who haven't won primaries, haven't won generals, like when we should really be taking the time to find candidates who are really ingrained in their communities, a fresh face with new ideas. I think that would go a long way to making these races, more competitive, instead of just saying you ran before, sure, we'll let you run again. Like we really got to take the time as a party to build our bench and find people willing to step up and run. And I think that could also, provide benefits in the long run.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving along our agenda. IL10 is next. I wish we were talking about having a decent recruit in IL10, but right now there's just one announced candidate in IL10, Joe Severino, which is now the official way to say his name. He was just on a very small radio station in Evanston, trying to promote his candidacy and attack every Republican, from Richard Porter to local grassroots leaders to the Lake County Republican chairman to the Cook County Republican chairman. Apparently that's what he believes to be a winning strategy, is to attack the party that you want to nominate you for office. He also attacked you personally, Matt DeRay, and said that I was grooming you, which if he knew any better, he'd know that Chris is more my type than you, but whatever. Matt, do you have anything that you want to say here? Or is it not worth your time?
It's not really worth my time, but I will say this. I mean, I can't totally blame him if you're not good at raising money, or you don't really have a campaign team around you and you're just grasping at straws. Taking a free radio gig anywhere, sure, maybe it gets your name out there to a couple people. So I might do the same thing at him, but if I were him, but I'd be
But Matt,
pretty
I'd say
remiss.
this. I think you're a much smarter politico. Lane's going to bring up a map of the 10th congressional district. And anybody who doesn't know the 10th doesn't understand how funny it was that I said a small radio station in Evanston. If you look on this map here that Lane's showing you, you'll see Evanston is far outside the 10th district. And a small radio station that he went on has no listeners actually in the 10th district. So maybe we'll set a rule that we only talk about candidates who actually know where their district is. That'll be our new rule for smoke-filled rooms. So let's move on to maybe candidates who actually know where their districts are. Chris, we talked about this briefly, but you weren't with us. So any thoughts on Supreme Court? I know that Chuy Garcia and the Hispanic caucus and the Latinos have been pushing for representation on the Supreme Court, and they've been pushing Jesse Reyes in that district against Joy Cunningham. I don't know how successful that they'll be, but they really want a Hispanic on the district, on the courts. And the first district is what they're targeting. So I'm curious if you've got any thoughts on that race.
I do. So Jesse Reyes is running for the Supreme Court. He ran previously in 2020. I believe he was the second most successful candidate on the ballot behind P. Scott Neville. But P. Scott Neville was slated by the Democratic Party. Now this is important because the Democratic Party is going to slating in 2 weeks. So the idea here is probably that Jesse is trying to get all the Latino committeemen together as like a united bloc going into slating in the next couple of weeks. Will it be successful? Probably not. I don't think the Latinos have the weighted vote to actually make slating successful from a party-wide perspective. I think it's probably going to be Joy Cunningham, who was appointed to fill Ann Burke's vacancy a while ago. So it's probably going to be Joy Cunningham slated. But committeemen have shown that they will buck the party establishment if they have to. And this is certainly a stark contrast how it was back in the day. But they might buck Preckwinkle and the rest of the Cook County Democratic Party entirely and say, hey, Jesse's our guy and we're going to get this guy elected to the Supreme Court. Now, I hope they start knocking on some doors because as we saw from the Chicago election, you got to get those people to turn out if you want a Latino to win your race.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to watch the slating. Obviously, Chris will have a lot to report after the Cook County slating process is complete. I don't see how they go against Joy Cunningham. I don't see how they slate against who is an incumbent officially, and a black woman at that. I just don't see how that's possible, how that will go. But this is potentially setting up a very bloody primary between the Hispanic wing of the party and the more black wing of the party, or however you want to word those terms, which could create some lines of controversy and some hard feelings for the party. So it's worth watching. All right, let's move to the next topic. So I'm just curious, Chris, and others, if you have thoughts. I know, Matt, you also cover Cook County for us a bit. I've been watching Eileen O'Neill Burke gain momentum, and I haven't heard any other candidates, serious candidates announced in the last couple of weeks here for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to replace Kim Foxx. And what I've been seeing is that a lot of those people who were from the office previously, who frankly got involved on the Republican side last time to try to take out Kim Foxx behind the Republican nominee 4 years ago, seem to be aligning behind O'Neill Burke in this race. She seemed to be picking up some momentum. She's got some more support over the last week by some retired judges and some others. Chris, what are you hearing about the state's attorney race?
Yeah, so the state's attorney's race is actually interesting, and it kind of goes along with this slating process that I just talked about in regards to the Supreme Court. So they're going to slating for the state's attorney's race also in a couple of weeks. But Eileen Burke's come out of this race really strongly. She announced her candidacy at the Plumbers Hall. She recently picked up the endorsements of Electricians Local 9 and the Roofers Union, and I would anticipate more union endorsements are coming for her. The other announced candidate, who is Tony Preckwinkle's preferred candidate, is Clayton Harris III. And from what I'm hearing from my colleagues in the Democratic Party, is that Clayton Harris III is basically, I think somebody described him as Kim Foxx's brother. That's how much his politics are similar to her. He hasn't really been out there much, which is interesting because Foxx ran in 2016 against Anita Alvarez. She was kind of out there already. You knew about her in the media and everything. Clayton Harris III, he's kind of been pushed to the sidelines. Maybe because they don't want to build his profile up too early, but it's certainly coming in interesting because when Kim Foxx said she wasn't running, they were talking about Joe Ferguson. Joe Ferguson, he's the guy, and he's nowhere. Yep. He hasn't announced yet, and you'd think he'd want to be let's be honest. Let's call spades. Cook County is about racial politics. You'd think Joe Ferguson would want to be that first white candidate out of the gate, talking law and order to try and drum up some of those votes. Eileen Burke's got it, and she's getting those people behind her. And here's what's going to happen. If Ferguson jumps in, he might have some money behind him, but he's going to split that vote and get Harris elected. I think at that point, if Ferguson's thinking about it, he's got to say no, because that can only lead to problems.
Yeah, listen, I think maybe the play here was let some people get out there and fight amongst each other and then show up later as the consensus candidate. But I don't know that option is really available anymore because a lot of those working class leaders in the district, a lot of the union leaders, and a lot of the former state's attorneys' employees are starting to line up behind O'Neill Burke. And I just don't know that there's much of a lane for Ferguson if he waits too much longer, especially with Cook County moving forward with their slating process so dang early. You just start to lose space in that race.
Exactly. And listen, if this is Burke versus Harris one-on-one, which I don't know if it's going to be, Donna Moore might jump in this race again and screw everything up. Who knows? Bob Fioretti might run as both a Republican and a Democrat, take that issue to the Supreme Court.
If Bob can actually remember what he's running for.
Exactly. So, but let's assume for a moment, for the sake of argument, that this is a Burke versus Harris race. This is going to be a bloodbath. I mean, this is going to come right. This is going to be very similar to that Chicago mayoral election we just saw, where the racial lines are drawn, the ideological lines are drawn, and it's a fight to the death to see who can get elected state's attorney in this county. And the Latinos are the deciding force. And hopefully they don't screw it up again like they did.
But in a race in Cook County versus a race in Chicago, it's a whole different dynamic. I mean, that puts the suburbs against Chicago basically in that race. It'd be really interesting to watch.
Not necessarily. Again, you're still talking racial politics. I mean, let's remember the Bill Conway, Kim Foxx primary in 2020. Again,
I'm not saying racial politics won't come into play. I'm just saying that suburban politics, geographical politics will also come into play if that's a one-on-one race.
Mm-hmm. So let's see if Ferguson jumps in this race. Let's see if anybody else does. But right now, it's looking like Burke versus Harris, and get ready for a showdown.
Yeah, I mean, if Harris gets it, I mean, ultimately that does mean Republicans will have a chance. I think if O'Neill Burke gets it, it's probably the Republicans will have a real tough time picking it up. But we got to have a good candidate just in case, because we could play in that race. Do we win it? Probably not, but we could at least carry some of those Cook County other races, carry some additional turnout, some additional support for some of those other races. Let's jump over to Oliver. I know you've got some quick updates, Oliver, on your side.
Yeah.
We've talked about Liz Chaplin and DuPage. You've got a new update on Liz Chaplin. What's going on there?
Yeah, I think we were all hoping she was moving to Florida, but I guess we weren't going to get that lucky. So looks like she endorsed the Lombard City Councilman who's going to run for her current seat, and she's announced she's run for recorder. This isn't a huge surprise. Now looking back at it, she's wanted to run for county board chair, you know, in past cycles, and was asked to step aside for Deb Conroy to run in that race. So I think this provides an opportunity for her to run countywide. The interesting thing that I'll report back on is that this is already held by a Democrat right now. So either she's challenging, she's primarying an incumbent Democrat, or she's or they're the retiring. So more to come on that. I just, you know, we've been talking about kind of what she's doing and where she's going. So I figured it would be good to close the loop there.
Yeah. Another thing I want to get an update from you on is Kane County. So
Yeah.
the Daily Herald ran a story recently about how the Kane County Republican Party is not recruited candidates for races. It seems jumping the gun. I mean, it's August. Petitions don't start getting passed for another month. But they were in the news, so let's talk about it. I mean, I don't know that it's as doom and gloom as they tried to point it in Kane, but we have been struggling as the Republican Party in Kane County lately. So what are you hearing in Kane County?
First of all, I thought that was kind of a strange article to be calling out the party like that. So I wonder if there's some broader context. So about a year ago, they got a new party chair, Andrew Lorario. He's probably from the more conservative wing of the Kane County Republicans. So for those not familiar, there's just a lot of factions out there in Kane County, and they've really struggled to kind of, you know, have a cohesive message. So from my understanding, he's actually done a decent job of at least, you know, putting in the work and trying to put some candidates together, even if you don't agree with maybe more conservative, moderate. But I thought the most interesting thing about that article is that they quoted the Democrat chair in Kane County and said that the reason people don't want to run is because of Trump. And, you know, they're scared off by Trump. And Andro said that's not even a conversation that people are having when we're recruiting candidates for office. So I thought that was an odd comment to make, especially given some of our conversations where it's, you know, suburban county, people that Trump is very much the top of mind when we're recruiting candidates, when other people are talking about running for office. So for me, that was kind of the big takeaway from that article.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it has been a struggle in Kane County for Republicans, and it shouldn't be. I mean, we've seen success in counties like Will County, where there's a lot of strong Republican efforts, conservative efforts. Kane has struggled to bring different factions together as the Republican Party, as a conservative organization. And as a result, we've seen some candidates do well in Kane County, especially legislatively. We've done okay with some candidates, but as a county as a whole, it should not be as blue as it is. We've just struggled as a party there. And this has been going back 6-8 years that there's just been a lot of infighting in the Kane County Republican Party between different factions.
Yeah, and I'll give Andrew credit. Like I said, I think it's challenging when a lot of the people stepping up to lead in that county are a bit more conservative. Not that there's anything wrong with being more conservative. I think it's, you know, it's when you're trying to recruit candidates that fit their district, it might not fit necessarily what they're looking for. If you're trying to get people involved, it might not necessarily be their brand of politics. And then they maybe hear some stories about how, man, all these people have been fighting in the past and it's very dysfunctional. So it's, you know, trying to revamp that brand is going to be difficult there in Kane County for sure.
Yeah. John or anyone else who covers Kane County, any thoughts on Kane County politics?
Yeah, I think, you know, it goes back to if they're actually going to kind of start putting the work in to do good races. In 2020, I did a race where about half the district was in Kane County. You know, and they spent a lot of time, you know, stuffing bags in literature rather than taking that literature and, you know, going out and knocking doors. You know, we can win in Kane County, but it's just going to take a mindset shift of what we're actually going to be focusing on. You know, it doesn't matter if you're moderate, conservative, you know, as long as you're willing to put the work in, and run a good race, you know, that's what we're going to need in Kane County to really start, you know, taking back these seats. You know, we lost every countywide race, and that was up in 2020. You know, we have a great opportunity to, you know, potentially pick up a state's attorney in the suburbs. You know, we just need to find good candidates you know, to run in these districts, because, you know, we have a good message that works with voters. You know, we see that in Aurora and Kane County. We just got to have the right candidates to get it out there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Rob Russell there, the coroner, and isn't he basically our only representation in the county, at least at the county-wide level?
I think Chris Lawson is the treasurer there, but he's been kind of in and out of county government for quite a while. And then I believe we have the recorder as well, but she's been in office for quite a long time and might not run again. So
yeah, we got some work to do in Kane County, so we'll keep an eye on it for us, Oliver, and keep us informed, because it's a county we got to do well. And if we're going to win statewide, we can't be doing poorly in some of these, you know, collar counties that are actually more red, like McHenry. Kane's a little bit bluer than McHenry is, but we got to do well in those counties, because I mean, if we're ever going to win statewide.
Amen to that.
All right, so that's our Illinois politics updates. In a limited time we have left, I have held off long enough. It's time for us to get into one of my rants, because this has just been driving me crazy. So Morning Consult came out with a approval rating for JB Pritzker. They track approval ratings of different governors and different elected officials, and they had a 54% approval rating for Pritzker and a 41% disapproval rating for Pritzker, which has led to some, including our buddy Patrick, who've talked about how Pritzker is Teflon. And I contend that part of the reason why Pritzker is Teflon is that the media and the press continue to give Pritzker a free pass, and it's driving me nuts. I'm going to give you a couple examples of times where Pritzker's just been completely let off the hook on situations. So it's being reported over the last week that there's a analysis going on the Illinois Department of Employment Security, because there was unemployment fraud to the tune of over $5 billion. Which is coming out of taxpayers' pockets, both federally and at the state level. Over $5 billion from IDIS was sent out for fraud, rather than to people who actually needed that unemployment. And it drove me crazy during the last election that Pritzker was given a total pass during COVID, when IDIS was struggling, their phone lines weren't working, people who were on unemployment, who desperately needed money, weren't getting the money they need. And now here we have proof that it was like 5.4 or more billion dollars were sent out fraudulently by IDIS. So the people who needed the money weren't getting it. It was absolutely a disaster. And when the press asked Pritzker, very nicely, of course, what's going on here, he just said, oh, this is Rauner's fault. He blamed it on the previous administration, which is what Pritzker's been doing. Well, newsflash, Pritzker's been in office now for almost 5 years. And when these problems were happening, he had been in office. He was in year 2 in office. You can't blame that on the previous administration. It's not all of it, maybe. You could maybe blame some of it. But this happened under Pritzker's watch. And once he said this is all Rauner's fault, that was it. They let him off the hook. Next example is the OEIG has been investigating a whole bunch of state employees who defrauded the PPP program. Dozens and dozens of state employees who defrauded the PPP program. People who worked for the state, who worked for basically JB Pritzker, have defrauded that program. And when they asked Pritzker about it, he's like, oh yeah, we're dealing with it. We can't talk about it because it's an ongoing investigation. And that's it. No pressure on Pritzker, no heat on Pritzker for the fact that employees who basically worked for him defrauded this very important PPP program that was intended to help small businesses, that was intended to help employees and help workers. And Pritzker's employees found ways, state government employees found ways to fraudulently get access to that money themselves. Another example is there was a report of neglect and abuse and cover-ups at state developmental centers. Just a horrible situation. The people who need help the most, and there's abuse, there's cover-up, and this is under Pritzker's watch. And I guarantee you, if a Republican was governor, he would have been completely hung out to dry on this, because it's a gross situation, it's a ridiculous situation, and we are several years into that controversy. And yet, when you hear Pritzker getting any sort of beef or problems, or even pressure on that situation, he should be getting pressure for that. He should be getting pressure for DCFS. There are absolutely horrible abuses of kids happening at DCFS. It is understaffed, underfunded, and it has been for all of Pritzker's time in office. And all he says is, oh, we threw a few more bucks at it, and he's let off the hook. No pressure on that. Heck, this is a dumb example, but the Chicago Peacekeeper Initiative is a program where it's a great program. It's a program where former cons, ex-cons are taken and employed and sent into high crime areas to try to reduce crime and try to show these people, mostly kids, younger people, that there's a different path than crime. It's an awesome program, but here's how this happens. If this is under Ron or a Republican, it's, hey, a former con has been put on the streets and then committed more crime. And this is a horrible program. Republicans are off. But under Pritzker, he's given a pass. Oh, you know what? It was just part of the program. This stuff happens. Don't worry about it. There are example after example after example of things happening where if a Republican was in charge, they would be completely vilified for this crap. And yet, because it's Pritzker, they just go, yeah, all right, okay, no big deal. It drives me crazy. He should be held to the same standard that Ronner was. He should be held to the same standard that Republicans are held to. And yet, for whatever reason, the media, the press give Pritzker a complete pass on these things. And it drives me crazy. So let me open it up to you guys on your thoughts. I'll finish with my little mini rant, though I've kind of done most of it. But I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts on this, because yeah, Pritzker right now, his numbers are solid, but half the reason is he's just given a pass every time something happens. And if this was Ronner, he would have never been given that kind of a pass. What do you got? Someone join me on this.
All right.
First of all, I thought you were gonna let Chris talk about Chicago, and I was so excited for him. And
Let's
then
stay on point. Stay on point.
No, well,
no,
because
no, no. So,
What's,
no,
what's the, well, hold on. What's the Ronner quote to that he said during one of those interviews? Focus.
Focus. Oh man, no, it's frustrating, but I think it's, it's just, we see this all the time at the national level, where the media wants to focus on Trump and all the things he's done wrong, when Democrats are doing stupid stuff over here, like they're just not paying attention to it. Or I think with Mike Hastings, look how much Mike Hastings had to do last cycle before Democrats finally were like, hey, maybe we should speak up and do something about it. It's like, I just don't see it changing unless something truly egregious happens, that they have no choice but to pay attention.
But if you want to keep getting frustrated with, the media gets frustrated with the prof papers, which are actually the Tea papers, but whatever. If you're not going to actually hold Democrats accountable, then why wouldn't Republicans and conservatives look for other options to finally hold some of these people accountable? Listen, I understand this is a blue state. I understand that their bread is buttered by these Democrat politicians. I understand that, but you've got a duty. You've got a duty to the public to hold both sides accountable, and Pritzker just is not held accountable. And that excuse about how it's all Ronner's fault. All right, maybe year 1, maybe year 2. We're in year 5 of JB Pritzker being governor. At what point do they stop allowing it to be this just sort of, oh, it was the other guy's fault, and maybe actually hold him accountable for what's happening under his administration?
Yeah.
So because you wouldn't let me talk about Chicago this week, I will play devil's advocate again here. So a lot of this is partially Bruce Rauner's fault, because the state was in shambles under Rauner. We didn't have a budget. None of these things were adequately funded. And it does take time for the state to recover from all those years of disorganization and everything.
5 years?
Yeah,
5 years with record revenues in the state of Illinois and plenty of money to work with.
And his
They're still
balanced
going to give
budget.
Pritzker past 5 years into his term this is all Ronner's fault. That, yes, like I said, first couple of years, I get it. You can blame it on the last guy, but you're telling me 5 years in that Pritzker does not have any responsibility for this, that it's still all Ronner's fault?
Well, you were talking about things that happened under COVID. You were talking about the unemployment system. You're talking about PPP fraud. That is within the first 2 years of Pritzker's administration. So by your own reasoning, he would be allowed to use that as an excuse for why things weren't done properly during those periods.
They're still not fixed. 5 years in, it's still not fixed.
We'll hold them accountable for that. But the other thing, you talked about the media always holding Republicans accountable, not the Democrats. But let's remember, again, under the Rauner administration, the Chicago Tribune was lock, stock, and barrel. Everything Mike Madigan did was wrong. Everywhere Mike Madigan went, it was his fault. It was his fault for the budget. That's where the Tribune went. That's where that was a conservative narrative, and they had an outlet for that. Now the Tribune doesn't do that anymore.
Newspaper. Chris, here, listen. Okay, I know you're playing devil's advocate. I do appreciate it, but I also know you're a bit more objective than that. So give me the other side of this, which is, are you going to seriously tell me that the media is holding Pritzker accountable for these things? Okay, one example, IDIS. You're going to give him a pass for IDIS. I gave you 5. You're going to tell me that that Pritzker is being held accountable for these things?
if you want me to be objective, no, certainly not. Pritzker's not being held accountable for much of anything. And that's the part of the problem with the Democrat monopolization of the media. And this is a whole nationalized effect, and why Republican media is just terrible. So nobody ever listens to it. We talked about the Illinois Review and the downfall of that and everything. But again, you're right. To be objective here, the media is mostly on Pritzker's side. Even a lot of political publications always takes Pritzker's side. And it's wrong. I mean, I think there should be a balanced discussion. Though I would still be objective, there was two sides of the issue under Ron.
Yeah, and I get it. I totally get it. There's a valid argument for that Ron gutted state agencies. I get it. We're just saying that we continue 5 years in to give Pritzker a pass for all these problems that are happening in state government. I'm just curious, at what point does Pritzker actually take some responsibility? This is a guy who at some point wants to be president. Is there at any point this guy is going to ever take responsibility for something that happens under his watch? And at any point is the media actually going to maybe be a little bit tough on the guy? I mean, when you see Rich Miller in Capital Facts, since I gave him credit before, I got to give him a little bit of a slap on this. Like when he even toys with the idea that, oh, Pritzker did something that maybe he shouldn't have done, he quickly apologizes for it. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, can we at least try a little bit to hold our state leaders accountable, whether they're Republican or Democrat?
That's where we come in, and not we being the six of us on this call, but we as Republicans. And when we do get people elected and we are working with these elected officials and candidates, is we can be driving that narrative. And we should not be hesitant to throw those punches. I mean, we see all the time people say, oh, I don't want to go after the Democrat, or they don't want to say mean things about Pritzker or their opponent. But we have to sometimes, just because we need to be sharing that message and getting that message out to voters. Because if the media doesn't do it, if the news isn't going to do it, then no one's going to do it unless we do.
Well, we also have to go into things understanding that this is the way the field is. It's going to be slanted towards them. And, we're going to be held to a higher standard. So we have to have better candidates, better messaging, all of that. If we get a decimal point off, like there's going to be a fact check tomorrow about how, we had a decimal in the wrong place. But, look at all these things that you listed that JB Pritzker's done, that Joe Biden's done. Like they're not getting fact checked or even remotely held accountable. So it's just part of it.
My wife, Abby Corbett, not Abby Oliver, my wife and I have a heart for kids. And DCFS, the problems there just break my heart. I mean, my sister's worked for, my kid sister in another state has worked for a similar agency. And she tells me stories where it's heartbreaking. I mean, these are kids. We're talking about the Democratic Party, the leaders of the Democratic Party who run the state from top to bottom. And we're talking about kids at DCFS. We're talking about workers with IDAS. We're talking about those the most in need, like these developmentally disabled centers. I mean, the people that the Democratic Party claims to be all about, and they're failing these people and they're not being held responsible for it. And it just drives me crazy. Just take the politics out of it for a second. These are the neediest people, the people who need help the most by their government, and forget whether it's Republican or Democrat. We just need to do a better job. And right now, Republicans have no reins of government. So yes, if we were in charge, hold us accountable. But right now, Democrats are in charge, and people who need help are not getting the help they need. And the leaders are not being held accountable.
Totally.
I mean, you're right. Republicans should do a better job, and we got to fight on these things, and we should be calling these things out. I thought in that last election, Bailey had a great opportunity to undercut Pritzker's narrative by hitting him on some of these things that were in the news even at that time. So had we run a better campaign, had we had a stronger candidate, I don't know. Maybe we could have called these things out. So yes, a pox on us for not doing better. But I think it's high time that Pritzker was held accountable for his actions and for his leadership, and in some cases, his lack of leadership. And we're 5 years in. It's about time that the media actually held this guy accountable. John, you jumped off, whether by choice or by accident, so now I'm going to force you. Jump in with some thoughts here. Unmute yourself. Let's go.
I think he may be frozen.
Yeah, I think he jumped out not by choice because he's frozen now. All right, well, maybe we'll make John start next week. And or you know what? We're always so nice to John. Maybe we'll find some reason. We always make fun of Chris. Let's make fun of John next week. What do you guys think? Since he can't defend himself right now.
Agreed.
Let's make fun of him right now.
Let's do it. What do you got? He's a horrible golfer. I heard that he can't seem to hit the golf ball at all. He's just out there duffing the whole time. Oh, and now he comes back. Now he comes back.
Selective hearing. Okay.
Yeah.
He's kind of like the media. He only hears what he wants to, and everything else goes out the other ear.
There we go. Matt takes us full circle. I love it. All right, we're low on time. We'll be a little nice to John, but someone come up with something fun to tease John about next week. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Especially thanks to Chris, Matt, Michael, and Abby, who joined us for the whole time. John's going to have some lame excuse why he couldn't join us the whole time. Special thanks to Lane, especially because I have like 7 different things in post he now had to add to this. So Lane will be up late getting this ready for release on Friday morning for all of you watchers and listeners. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I am going to do, I've got somebody over who's going to have smoked with me on my deck, who's one of our most loyal watchers and listeners of the Smoke-Filled Room. So, hey, maybe that could be you. Shoot us a note if you're a loyal watcher, loyal listener. Come join me on my deck for a smoke. We'll talk politics. We never seem to stop talking politics around here. But thank you, everybody, for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We will catch you next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.